Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the YouTube show and podcast, None of Our Businesses, with my colleagues, Jack DiMatteo.
Hi, everybody.
Charlie Zigmund.
Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Ty Carr. We're accountants here giving you our perspective on the latest in news, business news, tax, other news, all, of course, from an accountant's perspective. And what we have for you today, food shortages, is that the harbinger of civil unrest coming our way? Robots coming for us. Yes, again, we've got more on that. How the home construction industry is being affected by a shortage of key materials. And finally, investing with stimulus benefits. Okay, guys, well, I'm glad we can do this again. So let's take it away. How about we start with Jack on the food shortages issue?
Okay, well, we're going to kick it off this week with an article about a worldwide food shortage that's actually creating quite a bit of inflation around the world in food prices. I mean, we've seen it here a little bit in the U.S., but I guess my takeaway to this, it's like, it's pretty much across the world. But this kind of reminds me of a couple weeks ago we were talking about an energy crisis in Texas, and these are the kind of things where I think it's a little bit surprising for me that we're still having these types of conversations. You'd think in the world we live in today, we'd be able to solve things like food shortages, world hunger. Some of the underdeveloped nations, if you're living in a desert, obviously you can't irrigate that and create a farm out of it. But we have, underdeveloped nations that are in, decent climates where there could be agriculture. I mean, you'd think we'd start investing with the technologies and the resources that we have worldwide to maybe mitigate some of these things. And I think the thing that's scarier that they mentioned in the article is, at least in the United States, we have generally a pretty good safety net, for the hungry, for the poor. But you get some of these other nations and they talk about food shortages there, usually spark a lot of civil unrest. They talked about the Arab Spring and what was behind it. So, I mean, I guess my takeaway with this article is it's kind of reminiscent of that other one. It kind of surprises me a little bit that we get these global entities. They want to work together on something. It would seem like this would be something that they could focus on and actually, make it more than make a dent and actually, go a long way towards solving it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, well, I also think about, the unrest that it causes in many nations. It's unfortunate that such pain may be the primary or necessary catalyst for change in some places, right? Because you think about like the Arab Spring, I guess the result wasn't the result didn't finish off the way everyone was hoping, but it was kind of it was kind of looked at the time as somewhat of a positive scenario in terms of liberalizing some nations and their way of doing things. And so, I think that's what comes to my mind is that, man, it's you hate for suffering to have to be the catalyst, but the unrest that happens in these other countries can ultimately lead to better things at some point, if the unrest is sustainable or organized or other things. I guess there's just so many ifs there, right? But the counter would be, well, maybe there's better catalysts for change than hunger, right? To your point, it's like, really, this day and age, do we really have to see that kind of suffering? And where does that go? Where does that go domestically, right? I mean, we can sit kind of in our armchair, or I can sit in my armchair, I should say, and see that in foreign places and say, well, it may be the necessary catalyst, but then what happens when it comes home to roost? It's not, we've seen that we're not entirely immune to unrest here in the last year. So, what if hunger and rising food prices actually causes unrest in our own place? Maybe it wouldn't seem like such a potential, it'd seem like something we'd really want to avoid when it's in your own backyard.
Well, and it seems like to some extent it is a problem for people here in the U.S. as well. And so it just seems, it's always been interesting to me because it's one of those things where you see maybe the most direct impact with dollars spent in that field versus the outcome. And so it's like we spend all this money on the military and all these other things that are maybe have some argument to be a good idea in the long run, but yet we, like you said, we have all these today problems that we're not dealing with. And from a greater viewpoint, the world as a whole has those same problems. I forget his name, but there's actually a philosopher who takes the stance that you should be measured by, like, the way that you measure whether or not you're doing the right thing is by how, like, if you waste money that could have gone to feed children in Africa, and if you can say that $30 a day is how much you're wasting, but that could have saved a life, then that becomes the barometer for how much of a bad person you are for doing anything other than that. And it's a bit of a controversial viewpoint because it takes it to the extreme, but I've always kind of taken that to heart a little bit, because it is like, well, everything we waste money on, if we compare to what that would have done to someone who really, really needs it, it just seems like the most bang for your buck in terms of aid. And yeah, so I do think it's one of those wake up calls that we're finding out the hard way. I think also, just domestically, people learning, I know this is a different issue, but people learning how to cook more from home and not eating out and that sort of a thing should be part of the answer to, making more food available for a greater group of people. And I think that's a trend we're seeing since the pandemic has really picked up, but we'll continue to see expand. And I think it's one of the key problems in the world.
It's interesting because, this pushes on for everybody to be a good global citizen. And I mean, what a better, area to focus everybody on. I mean, there's an opportunity there because you look at some of these, underdeveloped nations, and I mean, what do? Drop a pile of money or drop a pile of food that, some warlord probably takes over anyways, and people don't see it anyhow. I mean, it's really a matter of the technology that we have and investing in that technology. And, when you talk about foreign aid, wouldn't you love to see it go into something that actually does some long-term good, starts establishing some agriculture, getting people to maybe, work for themselves, getting people to work, getting them, to be a sustainable. I mean, if you look at the size of this planet, there's a lot of land and resources. We talk about how we're using up what we have, but there's also a lot that's being unused, and you kind of have this unrest. So I kind of see it as an opportunity. If you're going to be a good global citizen, this is where you band together and you share some of that technology, and you invest in giving people a long-term solution. Not it's the infamous stuff. Give somebody a fish they'll eat today, teach somebody to fish they'll eat for a lifetime. So there's kind of that angle in it that I see. But hey, Charlie, should we hide? I hear the robots are coming.
Well, they are. I think it might be too late if you ask New York Times. They're coming for Phil in accounting, and it's not looking good for Phil. So this article is all about how automation is going to take all of our jobs. And kind of one of the quotes from the article I kind of liked was that it goes, the robots aren't here to hurt Phil. They're here to merge purchase orders into columns J and K of the next quarter's revenue forecast, and so on, mundane things that we do. And so I guess I wanted to get your guys' take, just talk about it a little bit on, anytime that AI comes along, we always have this fear that it's going to take our jobs. But I can only speak for myself. I know that in the roles that I fill, there's a place for automation and it's helpful. It's a big time saver and it's crucial. But I live in no fear that will actually replace my job, because most of the time for me, if I can get a job replaced by a computer, that's probably a job that I didn't want to have in the first place. I wasn't adding value in that instance anyway. And so I want to get you guys' take. I mean, is this the way of the future? Is everything going to get automated? Should we be afraid of our jobs? And is Phil in big trouble? What do you guys think?
I think it, like a lot of this stuff depends on short-term versus long-term results. Because one of the things about that I was inspired to think about as you were describing it, Charlie, is when companies across the board have automation occurring, does that lead to them just having a lower total cost, lower total human capital cost, or does it actually lead to them being able to do more, to do things they weren't able to do before, right? And I think it's kind of this fixed pie versus expansive pie thinking, right? In terms of, if you think of the world, or you think about the operation of a business as being a fixed pie, and you say, well, this business generates this amount of income from doing these very certain things, and it's fixed. It's never going to be more than that. Then it's like, well, the accounting function then gets a piece of that pie. And if you're shaving off a piece of the accounting function's piece of the pie to give to IT to do with technology, then accounting people get less, right? But that ignores something that seems to be historically the case, which is when there's technological innovation, businesses, companies, organizations, people, they do more. It's not like we just stop doing things. We achieve more. And I think a very specific example of this is, we've talked about big data in some fashions in the past, the use of big data with AI. And I've railed against talking about it in the small business context because it often isn't applicable in the short term of the small business context. But the one thing I can say about big data and AI is it allows us to solve problems that we couldn't imagine that we could ever solve before, right? Because there's certain problems and certain applications that require the ability to churn through a massive data set that a human mind cannot churn through. And so as we tackle that possibility, it's going to open up solving problems and doing things of value that we never thought of doing before. So, in the long term, what I'd like to think optimistically is that businesses will by using AI to handle kind of the more routine things, it's going to allow businesses, and it's going to allow society to tackle problems and do things that we never thought we would do before that are amazing. But then those things will require manpower or people power. Those things will require skilled people to be involved in them. And so it's a displacement of the work. It changes what the kind of work people do. But as long as people are flexible and willing to kind of go with the curve of where things are going, there would always be work if you believe in this expanding pie way of thinking, that the universe is always expanding. It's not a fixed universe. Our universe of possibilities is always expanding with the more technological help we get to handle basics, right? So that's what I hope is the case about this kind of thing. But time frame matters. In the short run, the universe may not have enough time to expand quick enough. And so there surely may be cases where the universe of possibilities haven't fully expanded yet, and in the short term, AI's doing what is to be done in the short term, and that displaces people from doing those things. I mean, I think that in the short term there will be some of that as well.
It's funny. A few years ago, I heard something that they talked about. These companies would, at one point, the only person there would be a CFO. They wouldn't have the need for any other accounting, finance people. That would be the only role left because all this stuff was going to be automated. And I've worked with a lot of big companies, and I've watched them go through, putting together, accounting, shared service centers. So, I mean, obviously, I think the goal is a lot of that, those transactional things, they kind of lend themselves to AI. I think, a lot of them with these bigger companies that you've worked with, you see it in the AP part. You don't necessarily need a clerk to sit there and do a three-way match when you can have a system that'll do that. And, but at some point, the ones that fall outside tolerance for our errors, somebody has to process that. So, when you hear these types of articles, I mean, it's almost like a scare tactic that everybody's going to be put out of a job. Yeah, I think it can eliminate some things, but, on the other token, like I say, somebody has to manage those errors. Somebody, that situation I just described. Well, it's to take headcount out of the individual business units and put them into one center. But what always inevitably ends up happening is they want their own accountant on site because you want to ask somebody. You're not going to be able to ask AI how to interpret these numbers or how come my margins went wrong. I mean, I think it's got certain inherent limitations. Now, there's another story I heard recently, and I can't give away too many details because it's not really public, but just suffice it to say it's in the medical industry. And AI was going to be used there, and it got to a certain point, and all of a sudden it got shut down because, again, people got threatened. Hey, wait a minute. They come to the realization where they think, well, wait a minute, that's going to take my job. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where, you're going to have robots diagnosing everything that's wrong with you. There's going to be some kind of intervention there. But if it can eliminate some of the transactional, manual process, whatever the heck that may be. Everybody's always complaining about healthcare costs shooting through the roof. So if you can use AI to do some of those things and ultimately lower costs, I mean, you would think it would be a good thing. But, I think when everybody hears AI, they think they're watching, a futuristic movie and that, it's going to be the Jetsons. And that's just not going to be the case ultimately. But Charlie, you bring up a good point. If you're one of those people that can truly be replaced by a robot, you might want to look in the mirror one day and say, hey, I need to do something about my skills because the train's coming down the track. And if I don't do something about it, I'm going to get run over.
Yeah, exactly. And the other interesting point the article brought up is that this has been a fear since, at least in the article, it was from 350 BC, because Aristotle worried that self-playing harp machines would make harp players obsolete. And, maybe that did happen. So maybe he's got a point there. But I think the real point to take from that is just that this has been a fear for as long as anyone's been doing anything. And, it just hasn't happened yet. Everyone has found something else to do. And so, yeah, it seems like something that that is kind of a non-issue, like you said, that people like to make into a bigger deal than it is. All right. Do you have another article we can talk about, Jack?
Sure do. This other one's a little bit of a head scratcher because all we're hearing about is the red hot real estate market, and we're heading into spring, and you would think builders would be geared up and ready to go. All you keep hearing from realtors is there's no inventory out there. So what would that say? Boy, somebody that was building houses would have one hell of an advantage. If there's no inventory, I'd be building houses like mad because I'd be selling them like hotcakes. Well, what's kind of crazy is there's a material that they need to build the basements in houses, and there's a shortage of it. And the fear is that that's actually going to slow down housing construction. So this is, I guess, one of these articles where you keep hearing how capitalism and everything, everything goes towards its efficiency. I mean, did they not see this coming? I mean, the real estate market's been going gangbusters for, years now. There's been a shortage of inventory for at least the last 5 or 6 years, and maybe before that I can think of. You'd think they would have got ahead of this. But the other thing that I found interesting in the article is there is an alternative. The trouble with the alternative is there's not a whole lot of construction people trained in using the alternative, which is kind of raises another thing you hear all the time about people there. I can't get a job. I can't get a job. I think you still see it all the time where, with all the resources and everything we have, why aren't we directing that towards getting people trained where they can get a job in a field that's, good paying and useful and contribute? So I don't know. Maybe I read too much into this article, but I kind of saw a few different things in there that I thought were just kind of odd and exposed some of the flaws that we still see on a daily basis. And I was wondering what you guys thought about it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting example of something that we've seen happen across a few industries in the pandemic. The thing also shortage in the supply chain affecting an industry or a business that otherwise has a lot of demand facing it, right? So it's like, yeah, that's crushing, right? I think a lot of us in business, as this whole thing was coming about in early 2020, nobody knew how it was going to affect their business. We didn't know, hey, are we going to have demand? Are people going to buy our products? How's this thing going to affect us? Wasn't clear. And then as 2020 went on, in some sectors, it was good news. It was like, oh, people are buying our products. Oh, there is demand for us, and things like home furnishings and a lot of people are doing remodels of their houses and in the, when it comes to the building, to the building sector and, things that kind of make sense in retrospect with all of us ending up spending so much time at home during 2020 and now into 2021. And so then the crushing thing is it's like you start out, you're on this roller coaster, right? You start out thinking, oh, how is this whole thing going to affect my business? And then you start to see the demand and the customers calling you for business. And you're like, oh, I think I'm going to be okay. And then you get kicked with the, oh, but you can't actually service your customers because there's supply chain shortages in your industry that prevents you from getting the materials that you need to actually build your product or build what you build or do what it is you do for your customers. And so, yeah, what a drama that all these businesses have been living through in that regard with that. And yeah, that's this story kind of just highlighted that, right? It's just one more case of that scenario of a place where businesses should be winning and are getting hurt in an unexpected way by the supply channel.
Well, and it seems like there's a theme emerging in almost all of these articles, and it's basically testing industry's ability to adapt to change, whether that's a person changing what they do and how they do it, or whether that's a building process that used to rely on a resource that's now constrained. But I mean, basically what we're seeing is that as the pandemic goes on, everybody's figuring out how to change and how to be better at that. And as I'm thinking about it, it's like that's really the basis of evolution. If you think about it, change and how we deal with a dynamic environment is what drives the evolutionary cycle. And this is just that same issue, but applied to businesses or to processes. And so I think it's going to be one of those trends that just continues even once the pandemic is over. Just be ready. The only thing you can plan on is change. So yeah.
And it's interesting. I was with a small manufacturer yesterday, and we got to talking about the supply chain and how everybody. I mean, let's face it. When China got shut down, there was a lot of manufacturing got shut down here because they didn't have an alternative supply chain. If it wasn't coming out of China, they had nowhere else to go. And so we were talking, and I mean, it was kind of funny. His take on it was, manufacturing's been declining in this country for years, but he kind of sees a rebound because I think as these companies, these suppliers, I think it's up to you to make sure that you have alternatives. I've been in companies before where, they've got the cheapest is if I can get this part from China, but the trouble with that is always, you need it in 7 days. Well, China's lead time is a month, 2 months, so you may not get it, and the quality may not be there. So you need to have, multiple suppliers that can produce these things. So hopefully something good will come out of it. But I just thought this was kind of odd. I mean, this is a chance to make money hand over fist, and lo and behold, what stops you? The fact that you've got a basic material shortage is kind of ironic. Charlie, you've got another article for us this week?
Sure. I've got an article in CNBC called How the Young Plan to Spend Stimulus Checks. And so, of course, we're still in the pandemic. And so there's the third round of stimulus checks is getting ready to be distributed. And this article did a survey of about 430 investors of different age groups and tried to basically get at the question of what percent of the money that you plan to get from the stimulus do you think you'll throw back into the stock market? And that's one of those things that has been, different generations have looked at that differently and been more or less excited to put their money into equities. But the way the article frames it is that, let's see, so of investors who were between the ages of 25 and 34, they were going to spend half the money that they got from the stimulus, which, by the way, is a stimulus payment. So it's basically not there to fund equities, at least in theory. And it looked at different age groups, and it found that was the trend. We know we've seen recently, we talked about on the podcast, but we've seen this whole explosion of Reddit and Wall Street bets and trying to really pump up certain stocks. And so, I guess I want to get your guys' take on is investing a generational thing, or is that maybe more a sign of the times that are happening now, to where it's not about their age, it's just people feel scared, and so they're trying to put their money in something that they think has value to them? Or is it maybe that stocks are more readily available to people due to all of these apps that make it easier, like Robinhood, to trade and that kind of thing? So maybe what we're seeing is not actually a generational shift, but more of just technology making something more available to a wider group of people. But I want to get you guys' take. Is that, what's going on here? Is that a trend that's happening, or something else altogether?
Well, I think, many of the questions you were asking, I would say the answer is all of the above. It's like the governments are giving people money. We know in the US that the way in which the money has been given out wasn't super targeted. And so there are plenty of people getting benefits that don't need it to survive. And I'm not saying that from a political standpoint of criticizing it per se, because, I'm not prepared to to kind of defend or figure out how you would give the stimulus in a way that was more targeted. I'm just stating it as I see it, that it just isn't targeted. So it is what it is. But that result is you've got people who don't need the money to survive getting this extra cash. And so then they're looking at that and they're saying, well, I can invest it. I can do more than just save with it. I can invest it. And then at the same time, you also have you have unprecedented access to the markets through online investing, and now the apps, the fintech apps that are making it available for people to invest using, and doing it through their phone apps and so on. And so there is part of the phenomenon that is the youth that have capabilities, have the technological capabilities to make use of all this new technology that gives them access. So yeah, you're sitting with this group of people who have technology, they understand it, they're able to easily use it to make the money. So both having both the cash available and the access to markets to make these investments, and so then there they go. And I guess the thing is that what I don't particularly like about it is that no part of that story is people who have carefully understood and studied the markets are making well-informed capital allocation decisions, right? That doesn't enter this whole scenario in any way, right? So basically, the government stimulus is then being pumped into turning our markets into a big roulette game, and that is a disappointing outcome to this scenario. So that's my take on it.
No, I guess I would say that age group of 25 to 34, two thumbs up for what they're doing with the money. I mean, they're thinking investing long term. Two thumbs down, and to Ty's point, I mean, exactly. I mean, to me, I forget the political. It just basically, you can go back to the very first stimulus, and none of them have been well targeted, well thought out, well planned. It crosses two administrations, and it's getting to the point, I guess, where you can see. I mean, they sat on this for how long, and they're giving people what, $1,400. That's not going to save anybody from oblivion, and that kind of the proof is in that they don't need that money to live on. People have been living somehow, some way. When was the last stimulus? 8 or 9 months ago. So I mean, it cuts across. It's just the inability of this government to roll something out, target something, make it efficient. I mean, even if it goes back to the first stimulus, they just started bazookaing money everywhere, whether you needed it or not. People didn't know what to do with it. So it's a very inefficient process, and you don't need the money. You have to put it somewhere. So if they're not buying refrigerators and TVs, hey, they're going to invest it in the stock market. But, Ty, I also see that too. It's just, we've been talking a little bit or alluding to it on the show about, it's just, you look at the stock market just making records day in and day out, and it really doesn't kind of jive with what you see on the street. And I just, this is kind of another symptom of that. We've been talking about the 0% interest rates. If you want return, they kind of force you to go into the stock market. People watch the stock market, producing these eye-popping returns. They get their hands on some money they weren't planning on, and they're going to play the roulette wheel in the stock market. And so it's I'm just hoping this doesn't end badly at some point in time for a lot of people.
Well, and even if you need it, they've got a saying for that. Even if you need that money to live on, what's the new cool saying to get you to waste all your money on the stock market when you're not sure if it's a good idea? YOLO, you only live once. Go ahead, just put it all on, put it all on red and see what happens. And so I think that has that mentality. And obviously that's just a saying, but it's also a mentality and it's a trend. And I think it's affected a lot of people because times are crazy. So why not? Why shouldn't we be doing crazy things is the thought process, I think. I just want to share that.
Well, I just want to learn how to bazooka cash. I think that's
helicopter's the usual term, but I don't know, bazooka's cool. I gotta be original.
That does sound cooler. I'm gonna have to start bazookaing some cash.
Thank you for joining us on this week's edition of the None of Our Businesses podcast and YouTube show. Headlines from today's news is seen through the eyes of accountants. We hope you enjoyed it. Tell your friends, family, and colleagues about us, and we will see you back here next week. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye, Ron.
everybody.